Hey guys, today we're going to talk about relative pronouns and in particular about relative clauses. There are two kinds of relative clauses, restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. How do they differ and what pronouns can we use in either of them? This is the topic of this video, so have fun watching it. So today we're talking about restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. I already talked about this distinction in my video Relative Pronouns in English Introduction. You may also be interested in my other video on relative pronouns, substituting relative pronouns. Anyway, what are restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses? Let's start the former, restrictive relative clauses. Restrictive relative clauses are also known as defining relative clauses. This is because they define the subject or object, by which I mean they carry essential information about the subject or object, without which the main clause would be incomplete, would have a different meaning, or wouldn't make sense at all. We can use all the relative pronouns that we talked about in the preceding videos in restrictive relative clauses, so which, that, who, whom, and whose. As far as things are concerned, that is preferable, but both which and that are commonly used. We usually don't separate the restrictive relative clause from the main clause by a comma. And now, let's have a look at some examples of sentences with restrictive relative clauses, and let's try to remove the clauses to see what remains. So, here's the first sentence. I like people who smile a lot. If we now remove this part, we get I like people. Now grammatically, both sentences are correct, but the meaning of the second sentence is much more general than the first ones. It means they like people in general. In the first sentence, there is the restriction as to what kind of people I like. This is why we call it restrictive clauses. And now here's another example. I eat only vegetables that I grow myself. If we remove this part, this restrictive clause, we get I eat only vegetables. Again, grammatically, both sentences are fine, but they have a totally different meaning. The second one implies that the only thing I eat are vegetables. And here are some more pairs like this. She's looking for a woman whose maiden name was Hammond. She's looking for a woman, after removing the restrictive clause. So, here, the restrictive clause gives us some context. The second sentence is too general or even ambiguous. Here's the house which I bought. Here's the house. Now, the relative clause in the first sentence specifies which house exactly I mean. The men whom the witch turned into frogs started croaking. Now, this is the restrictive relative clause. If we remove it, we get the men started croaking. In this example, if we remove the relative clause, the sentence either makes no sense or can be understood in a different way. The verb to croak also means to speak in a rough, low voice that is hard to understand, which is not exactly what we meant when talking about the frogs. So, as you can see, restrictive relative clauses are essential for the full understanding of what we are being told. Now, what about non-restrictive clauses? Non-restrictive relative clauses are used for additional, non-essential information about the subject or object. Even if we leave them out, we still know what or who we're talking about. Non-restrictive relative clauses are usually separated by commas. We can use all the same relative pronouns as with restrictive clauses, except that. Have a look at this example. His youngest daughter, whom we also invited to the party, likes Italian food. Now, if we leave this non-restrictive clause out, we get his youngest daughter likes Italian food. So, we still know exactly who we're talking about. The information contained in the relative clause didn't define the subject at all. It just added some additional facts. Here's another example. We dressed up as frogs, which was a good decision. if we leave out this non-restrictive relative clause, we dressed up as frogs. So the relative clause in the first sentence doesn't tell us anything more about the frogs than what we would know from the second sentence, without the relative clause. And here's an example with who. His wife, who loves pizza, is a very nice person. If we now leave out this non-restrictive relative clause, we get his wife is a very nice person. Here, the relative clause also gives us some extra information about his wife. But even without this information, we still know who we're talking about because normally one has just one wife. But in some cultures, one can have more wives. Then we could use a restrictive relative clause to tell the wives apart. So without the commas here, we would get a restrictive relative clause. His wife who loves pizza is a very nice person. And in this case, we would be talking about one of his wives. So the one who loves pizza as opposed to the other ones who don't. Finally, an example with whose. The old house opposite the bank, whose roof is being repaired, will be sold at auction. So let's remove the non-restrictive relative clause, and we get the old house opposite the bank will be sold at auction. Again, even without this additional information about its roof, we still know exactly which house we're talking about. So as you can see, restrictive and non-restrictive clauses may look very similar or even identical, except for the commas in writing. So it's crucial to remember to put the commas where necessary, or you can end up saying something you didn't intend to say.
Okay, that's it for this video. If you like it, a thumbs up would be great. Also, make sure to subscribe for future videos. If you want to leave a comment or ask a question, you're welcome to do so. Thanks for watching.